Good morning and welcome to Frank's School on the 120th day of the 5th year, first video. And I'm going to title this video, So What Are These Inconvenient Values? I watched my own video and I looked at it and I thought, maybe I should take a little bit more time to say, well, what are these values? I had said elsewhere, I've explained about that elsewhere in Frank's School. Well, elsewhere is somewhere in over 1,700 videos. So how do you find that? I go along sort of thinking I don't want to repeat myself. If I've taught it before, I don't want to teach it again because I've already taught it. But that's probably foolish in a way because most people who watch one of my videos haven't watched the other 1,700. So I'll tell you where. In the playlists, actually. I'll go to that here in a little bit. And there you'll immediately see that the light is better if you go back to the playlist, to the one that I'm going to tell you about. But first, let's see, I wanted to say something else about that. I know. I'm a teacher. I'm not a preacher. But maybe I should preach. Preachers don't worry about repeating themselves. I think about politicians. They give all these speeches. Well, basically they give the same message again and again and again. I'm not like that. I'm a teacher. But here I briefly launch into preaching, and maybe I should start to do that because I'm certainly not ashamed of these inconvenient values. I think they're right. I'm proud of them. I'm just used to the idea that no one's going to really want to listen to him. Well, in any case, on a more specific way, I had said, Grandpa Jim said, wood does not need to be painted. Well, wood, though, does need to be roofed or made in such a way, roofed, so it can be dry. It can get wet, but then it's got to dry out. If wood is wet and stays damp all the time, it'll rot up. Now, wood underwater won't. Venice is built over wood, and I guess I heard Berlin, Germany is too. I guess so. If it's underwater wood, it doesn't rot. But you can't just put wood out in a pile somewhere; it'll rot up. So I should add to that: wood does not need to be painted if it's kept dry, or enabled to mostly kept dry. Poisoned wood. While I'm on the subject of wood, I refer to it as poisoned wood. I'm not so sure what it's called, but if you go buy a fence post, as my son did, with my money, because of the goats, he went and built some fences. And he said he needed posts. And I said, well, I got posts up in the field. But he meant, in his mind, real posts. Well, when you go to a building supply store and you buy a post, what you get is a tree trunk about that big around. You can see by the grain that it's the heart of the tree. It's the only thing that tree was ever, like a telephone pole. And it's been turned on a lathe so it's smooth, some kind of lathe, and it's green. To me, that's poisoned. There's some kind of copper in it, so it can be underground and it won't rot up. Well, that wood doesn't have to be roofed. But that wood, you're not even supposed to burn it. What kind of wood is that? I mean, I just call it poisoned wood. It's one of my inconvenient values. I do not buy it. I would not buy it. I have some, but what do you do with it? I'll build something with it. But anyway, it's used in fencing, modern standard fencing. Fencing, as most people think about it here, it's permanent fencing. They'll go to great efforts to build a corner, brace it, and then draw it real tight with little ratchets. So it's high tensile fence, and it's just like 5 wires, and they'll electrify it so it'll keep cattle in. And you don't want to go moving that fence very much, not when you've made all that effort. Plus, if you draw something tight, it makes for a straight line. You can't make a curve. Well, my fences may be humble. There's some expression, ugly as a mud fence. Well, my fence is built largely out of pallets. I don't think they're ugly, but in any case, they're not they don't have that arrogance of being permanent. Like, here's my idea of a fence. I'm going to build a fence. Boom, it's going to stay there. Build it. It's there for good. No, I move them all the time. The other thing about fencing, as modern day people think, there's no margin. People have come to like that look. You see a fence, and it's hardly that the fence is there because the grass is short before it, the grass is short after it. You could use a weed whacker or whatever so it's as if the fence weren't even there. Well, that's that monolithic cultivation of pasture. The fence does not create a margin where rabbits could be, or other species could be, or trees could grow. And people have come to say, well, that's well groomed, that's pretty. Well, what they're looking at is monoculture. There's a whole thing about margins. I won't get into that now, but the very great importance of margins. People who live on the margins. I won't go into it. All right, kilocalories. That word I even call it tax. Kilocalories as currency. If you wanted to, and that would be sort of getting into the scientific, or at least pseudo-scientific origins of my values. I measure things in those. Wow, boy, do you see the world differently then. And then a footprint, an energy footprint. The word carbon footprint came up, I don't know, maybe it's been around for 15 years now, carbon footprint. Well, I could expand that to energy footprint in general. How much energy of whatever kind, whether it comes from carbon or not, is being used. But maybe just the word footprint. How big a footprint is being made by something that you do? I mean, if you bring in a bulldozer and excavate deep and then pour a footer with concrete and steel, you've made a permanent, you could say scar in a way on it. That is, of course, the Acropolis in Athens, that's a pretty major footprint too, even when it's destroyed. But the village that was here had such a gentle footprint that it's quite difficult to figure out where things were. Well, I'm in the business of trying to make a light footprint. All right, Mom's collection. These are things I'm just kind of taking up. Mom had quite a. I said Grandpa Jim, and then Mom imbued me with these values. Well, Mom had quite a collection of sort of primitive furniture and tools and things that just went with her love of farming. It wasn't particularly practical, but she had them. And I'd asked her when she was getting old and she was sick and it was clear she wasn't going to be around forever, I said to her, Mom, what do you want done with all this stuff that you've got like that? Do you have a plan? And I remember she said, well, maybe a museum. And I thought, museum, I really didn't think there was enough there for a museum. Again, elsewhere, I talked about this. I know where I talked about it. I wrote up I should write this down. Old and Other Ways Museum. Old and Other Ways Museum. I think if you would Google that, you would find that. I'm not so sure I have it officially in Frank School anywhere, but I describe it there. All right. So could it be a museum? But then I got thinking, well, added to the stuff I have, yes, maybe it could be a museum. All right, now back to this elsewhere. Playlists. In these 1,700 videos, no, I can't imagine somebody, unless they started at the beginning and decided they were going to be a graduate of Frank School and they were going to take the whole course. Hasn't been done yet, maybe never will. But I made it a little easier. I created playlists. And that's kind of like, what I'm doing now is I'm cross-referencing. If you would go on this site and just click on playlists, there will be a list where I've organized things. And if you will go to the playlist Decentralist Action and Inaction, there's 3 videos in that playlist, and there is where I basically preach. After 2 years of teaching fairly neutral, just teaching stuff that a homeschooling mom or dad would probably want their students to know. After 2 years of that, in the third year, I finally showed my cards, and I revealed my politics, you might say. I did it in a sort of a scientific way earlier, but then by the end of that, I just kind of launched into a sort of a preaching. So those 3 videos, if you would go to them, there you would find out, get the best idea of what are these inconvenient values. Now, decentralism was my solution, and it might or might not be wrong, right or wrong, but you can, whether the solution is right or wrong, there you can sort of figure out what those values are that drive me. Well, I'm going to go back to practical things very soon. My shoulder is slowly getting better, and I've got a lot of stuff outside to show you. Bye for now.